White text over video of past events. Logo, Cultural Access Collaborative. Professional Development Series presents Loud and Proud, maximizing your accessibility info for guests. At left, presentation slides. At top right, mini video of presenting speaker. Below, an ASL interpreter signs.
Hello again, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Loud and Proud, maximizing your accessibility info for guests, presented by Cultural Access Collaborative. My name is Bill Green, and I'm a steering committee with the collab. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a white, middle-aged man with dark hair and beard. I'm wearing glasses, a headset, a green fleece, and I'm sitting in my office at work. I am going to pass it to my co-presenter, Jesse Swanson, to get us started.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jesse Swanson. I'm also with the steering committee. I use he, him pronouns, and I am a white man in my mid-30s with glasses, and I am balding. So I'll pass it over to Bill.
Great, thank you, Jesse. For those of you who are not familiar with the Cultural Access Collab, our mission is to empower Illinois' cultural spaces to become more accessible to visitors with disabilities. There are 4 primary pillars central to our work, and those include free professional development workshops like the one that you're attending today, an accessible equipment loan program, an access events calendar, and a growing statewide network.
And obviously, accessibility is a priority for us. So our program today includes real-time captioning provided by Efficiency Reporting, as well as ASL interpretation provided by First Choice Interpreting. If you'd like to view those captions in a separate browser, you can do so by using the stream text link that we've included in the chat here. And we encourage you to submit questions that we'll be taking at the end of the program for our presenters using the Q&A feature. And we'll be collecting those and working through them at the end. If you have any issues with accessibility, please reach out to our support team via the chat function. And in case you find the chat, just in the case you want to find the chat pop-up bothersome, you can turn it off and use the show chat previews option by clicking the caret next to the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So I think that's all the housekeeping.
Great, thank you, Jesse. This is Bill again. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So today's speakers, including Jesse and myself, will be Carly Englander and Lauren Pincus. On the screen right now are pictures of the 4 of us. As we go through our program today, Carly and Lauren will also give their image descriptions. So if you are interested in speaker bios, that was in the document shared with you also. But without further ado, let's get to our presentation regarding access information at your venues today. Next slide, please. So as we are talking about today, we want to lay some groundwork and talk about why do you need access pages, considering that many people who identify as disabled, the most likely place that they'll make first contact with your organization is through the website. And one of the things is you offer meaningful cultural experiences. As cultural institutions, you are trying to provide access to people with disabilities, and we want to make sure that folks with disabilities know about that. You want to connect people with what you offer and make sure that the efforts you have made are well advertised and published to the public. Some of those people identifying as having disabilities will contact that, but also so will friends, family, other people who know someone who could really benefit from the support that your organizations are giving. You need to answer the question, will this experience be accessible to me? Providing information ahead of time. And really something that I think is always important when I think about in my work is creating a welcoming space. Very often for folks with disability, entering a venue, they feel shut out or that there are a lot of barriers to having a meaningful experience. And it's so rare that someone has the opportunity where they come into a place and realize that they had been thought of. And as thoughtful and accessible folks in cultural institutions, we want you to be able to share that information and to be able to share that really powerful and meaningful experience with folks who have disabilities. So I will now pass it back to Carly.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carly Englander. I'm a steering committee member. I use she, her pronouns. Brief image description of myself. I'm a white woman in my mid-30s. I have curly brown hair, wearing tinted glasses and a gray sweater. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit about why you might need an accessibility page.
She cocks her head, listening to her headphones.
So sorry. So the first step is that anyone interested in an event has a potential to identify as having a disability. It is, I have a couple of statistics here that I found off of the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities website for the city of Chicago. So in the Chicagoland area, over 520,000 residents, which is approximately 10.1% of the population, report having a disability of some kind. If we want to take that to a national level, there are 40.5 million individuals with disabilities, which equals about 12.6% of the population. There is a very strong likelihood with those types of statistics that someone attending the event will identify as having a disability. And so they're going to be interested in learning more about the event. And we found that generally folks like to do research usually through online venues first. Next slide, please. So generally speaking, who is going to be looking for this information? Obviously, the individual with a disability will likely be searching. That could be folks with physical disabilities, such as individuals who are deaf, hard of hearing, or possibly blind to low vision, people with mobility disabilities. There's also the possibility of individuals who identify as having learning disabilities or cognitive developmental. And there's also the likelihood that interested people who are connected with those individuals, so family members or friends or possibly a community member, will be going online and trying to do research to learn more about a venue or an event on that individual's behalf. So now I am going to pass, excuse me. So now I'm going to pass it over back to Bill.
Great. Thank you so much, Carly. So I'm just going to discuss some of the useful information that belongs on your organization's website. Again, oftentimes people with disabilities who are looking for information and preparing for visit to your venue, the first point of contact is going to be the website. And I can speak from my own lived experience as someone with a disability and working in the field of access that you can never provide too much experience or too much information to people ahead of time. People always want to know as much as they can to really prepare their visit. The more information you provide, the more welcoming you're going to be also. So let's start with some of those things, thinking about the interaction, those kind of evergreen, physical and so on things. So we want to think about how guests will approach, interact, and exit your venue. To begin with the approach area, just beginning with something like paratransit. In Chicago, a paratransit vehicle needs to have an address. It can't be given a venue name or an intersection to drop people off. So providing an address to folks that they can use for paratransit is helpful, and also thinking about what is that address you're giving. Is it the address that's closest to the accessible entrance because of a ramp? Is it an entrance that has the least amount of travel from the curb into your venue? Or is it an entrance that is close to staff, like a visitor center or other staff that can be easily contacted in the moment? And also, are there things like benches there for people to wait? So as you're looking at the different possible addresses, drop off and pickup points of your institution, think about that in terms of paratransit. Entrances and exits themselves, giving people information and letting them know where there are ramps, but also in Chicago, we have a lot of rotating revolving doors, and having that kind of information about where there's a revolving door or where there's not the revolving door can be really beneficial for folks also. Automatic doors, elevators, so on. Navigating space. So I mentioned elevators, but letting people know where those are available, making that clearly marked on a map, and also free to be redundant with that information as well with other information. Distances can be incredibly helpful. A lot of times people, when they're coming to a space and they know it's larger and they want to plan where they're going to travel within that venue, they want to think about how far that's going to take them and maybe how long that would take them, and think about also what is the space they're going to be traversing as far as are there going to be places to stop and rest, etc. So being able to provide distances. One thing that might be very beneficial is just providing rough distances as far as like the space rather than giving distances in amount of time. Everybody's going to travel at a different rate. So it can be really helpful to give a physical distance rather than a, say this would take 15 minutes, let people know this is 400 feet, etc. Bathrooms. You can't give enough information about bathrooms. Let folks know where the all gender bathrooms are, the family bathrooms, the single stall bathrooms, changing tables. For those bathrooms that are large enough for people who might need another person in there to provide toileting experience, those infant changing tables, those adult changing tables, having that kind of information can really make the difference for someone knowing if they want to come to your venue or feel like that they're able to stay for a lengthy time, etc. Construction and temporary changes can be great information to share, and a great way to do that is putting an alert, something that draws people attention, let them know that maybe it's changing the way they enter or exit your building, but also just letting them know that construction is happening because that sound, that other things from construction may feel like a barrier for folks, especially folks with sensory sensitivities or other reasons. And being clear about your service animal policy, whether that's putting down with the ADA, or if there's specific things about your venue that you want people to know about service animals, can be additionally sharing information about companion animals, but making a very clear statement about service animals at your space. Again, letting them know if there's a spot where it's helpful for them to check in so that staff can be alerted of that. It allows people to come and enter and know that there's a procedure in place and just helps them feel more welcome. Next slide, please. So in addition to looking at some of those kind of infrastructure things and policies, your venue also offers probably a lot of tools. So it might be a visual schedule or a social narrative. Those can be extremely helpful to help people prepare for their trip, support them during their trip, and even after as reflexive tools. Let folks know that that information is available. So rather than being surprised or leaving the venue and wishing they had known about that, they're aware of that ahead of time. Quiet rooms and sensory bags can be the same thing. Obviously, wheelchair rentals is something that people are often put on information without giving that a second guess, but it's great to also put this other information on there to share with folks, just so they know what is available to them. Plus, your institution may have unique things available to folks that are not common with other places. Make sure they know about that because you want people to take advantage of that. And then giving sensory information can really help people plan that trip. Letting folks know about where there's lighting, significant changes in lighting, for example, could be something that someone wants to know about and could help them know better how to navigate your space when they come to the venue. Noise, temperature changes, crowds, letting folks know there are times of year when it's going to be more crowded, spaces that might be more crowded. You can talk about noise as in whether it's noise that's there as sort of a permanent fixture, noise that changes as crowds, seasons change, and so on. Providing that information will only support people as they arrive. You don't want to hold back that information and be afraid that someone might not come because they think it's a barrier. they're going to now come and be informed and be able to opt into those things. And that's really one of the most important things we do, is give people lots of information, lots of things to plan ahead of time so that they know what they are opting into when they come to your location. Again, you cannot provide enough information. And even though all of this is right now, we're talking about putting this on a central website where people would have first contact, you can always repeat this, whether that's in ticketing, on special events, etc. But I'm going to pass it over to Jesse again. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Bill. And so now that you have now that you've welcomed patrons to your venue, the question is, what services can you provide? And the important thing about listing your access services is that you list all of your available services. And you know, I'm an employee and a producer at the Chicago Humanities Festival, so I've chosen a couple of those services that we provide just as an example here. So think about the different barriers that may exist in your space. Hearing access, we offer open caption, ASL interpretation, and assisted listening devices. Visual access, in the form of audio description, physical access, wheelchair accessible seats, companion seats, and aisle seats, as well as varying degrees of sensory access. We've also put together quiet rooms and those other kinds of experiences that may be beneficial. Just a reminder that not all services cost money, right? It's just about consideration. You know, making aisle seats available for individuals who may use them doesn't cost any money. It's just about strategy and figuring out how best to provide service to folks who need those things. Similarly, language and policy around service animals. You know, we obviously allow service animals, but the more information that you can provide and say, hey, this is how this works inside our venue, those are things to consider. The other thing that I wanted to make sure to bring up is that there is equal value in transparency about lack of accessibility. Honesty is truly the best policy. There is no shame, and in fact, there is pride in being able to say, hey, listen, we're going to be as upfront about the challenges that you might face in this building while you're here. And so if you only offer seating in a limited section, accessible seating in a limited section due to stairs or whatever, or something that used to happen at a venue that I worked at was that the elevator would go down frequently. And being as communicative about that as possible, the last thing that you want is an individual arriving at your venue expecting to be able to take an elevator up to the 3rd floor and realizing, oh, not today, right? So being as transparent about those things as possible, and just reiterating again, more information is better than less. Next slide, please. So when someone accesses your accessibility page, and now they've read about all the fabulous services that you provide, or they've now gotten a map of your venue, there are probably going to be some questions or some requests, right? So we want to figure out the best way to get them in touch with the individuals who will be working with them to make sure that their visit is successful. So you want to make sure to have clear language about how and when people should request services and disclose their need. And typically the best way to do that, our best practices, are to offer as many options for communication as possible. Some people prefer email. Some people communicate best over the phone. Some people prefer to have an in-person dialogue, right? So offering an access-specific email, oftentimes I've sort of provided a placeholder here, but access@yourorg.org is usually a good placeholder for those things. Making sure that you're reachable by phone and that individuals who are going to answer the phone for your org are educated and able to work on access-related questions. And then last but not least, obviously presence in your venue. It's really helpful to have folks know who they should look for access services. At CHF, we have access volunteers with special colored t-shirts that have language on them that let them know like, oh, that's the team to go to when we need this service. So, you know, we want to make them as visible and as easily accessible as possible. And last but not least, we just wanted to remind you again that repetition and access to this information is really important. So while you're going to build a page that's specific to Access, it's also really, really helpful to bake this language into your normal purchase path. Every step of the way, any patron who's looking to purchase a ticket to your venue should be prompted with Access information. And now I'm going to hand it over to Lauren Pincus.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Pincus, and I am a steering committee member, as well as I work at Chicago Humanities with Jesse as an audience accessibility coordinator. And I am a white woman with shoulder length, dark blonde hair. I'm wearing glasses, and I have a navy blue shirt on, and my pronouns are she and her. And as you can see, I'm going to talk about where on the site you can find this information, as well as I'm going to show you some examples from different organizations, including the one I work at. So we've mentioned this a few times, repetition is key, and you'll probably hear it again throughout this workshop. We just want to reiterate that you can never have this information too many times. And putting it wherever you can, right? So on your venue pages, on your emails to audiences, in pamphlets, program guides, wherever you can put this information, that is the best practice. And then training that frontline staff to know where that information lies is really important. So if any customers have questions on site, they can head to that staff and the staff will be able to assist in any way. Next slide, please. So what are some good examples? Like I said, I was going to include some examples from the organization I work with. So at Chicago Humanities, we highlight access in all of our events. It is part of our mission and our values. And I wanted to include here what our page looks like. At the top, we have our mission statement, and then we have a paragraph that explains what we're doing at Chicago Humanities and what we've been doing. So it explains that there is a full-time audience accessibility coordinator and that the staff is being trained in access. Next slide. And here is where you can request and know how to request an accommodation. As Jesse mentioned, these are some of our accommodations. So if you press on that caret, a drop down will occur and it will explain how you can request. And so this is just one way that you can represent this on your website. Next slide, please. And here I wanted to add a little bit more of what we've been doing at Chicago Humanities. We have archived videos on our YouTube channel, and with that, we have our part-time box office staff captioning those videos whenever they have downtime. And so if you see on our YouTube channel, it says CC in brackets. That means that a human has captioned it, and it's not YouTube AI generated captions. Next slide. And here is that front path that Jesse was mentioning. So you have here one of our events, Joyce Carol Oates, that recently just passed. And you can see here that you have icons, the OC icon and the assistive listening device icon with the words of what they are correlated to right next to it. And we do that because on our program guides, we also include those icons. On our signage at events, we include those icons, and it allows the customers to know what those mean when they see them on site. All right, and this is our venue page, one of our venue pages. So as you can see, we have driving directions, parking, CTA, and then we have a whole section of accessibility. And it mentions mobility access, our assistive listening devices policy, our sensory kits and toy policy, and our service animal policy. Now with the mobility, that will change per venue, right? But when we send out emails to our customers, the access section will actually include more than just the mobility and all of this information. It will actually include what services will be provided with open captioning or ASL, audio description. I will include that in those emails. because that is event specific and not just venue specific. And here we go. If you were to purchase a ticket with us, you will see it says accessibility requests. You will hit that caret, it will drop down, and you will see our accommodations. Now, if none of the accommodations that we supply are what you need, you can add additional notes and we will make sure that you are accommodated for our events. Next slide, please. All right. And so that's what Chicago Humanity has been doing. I wanted to also include Stefan Wolf here because they've been doing some really wonderful work as well. And I wanted to show their website here so you can see very similar to ours. They also include where the accommodations are and how you can request an accommodation. And I know it's quite small, but underlined in red, you'll see an access@stefanwolf.org. So they have included an email where customers can go and ask their questions that they have. Next slide, please. And another one we have is the Goodman Theater. What's really cool about them is they have a video of people who have used their accommodations. And even if you press into their, let's say you go into the blind and low vision services, there'll be another video specific for that accommodation. And I think that's a really neat way to not just state what you're doing, but also show what you're doing. And I wanted to include Court Theater because I understand the Goodman, Stefan Wolf, Chicago Humanities, we've been doing this for a long time. And it's a journey, right? So you're not expected to just put up an access page right away, right? You can start small and that's okay. So I wanted to include a smaller theater, Court Theater, where, they have an audience development associate who are answering those questions. It's not an access coordinator. And that is okay too, right? Just having that person there though is so important for that contact. All right, next, please. And I wanted to highlight Bill's work at Lincoln Park Zoo. You can see here the map is wonderfully descriptive of all of the areas that you have accommodations. So you have low sensory areas, noisy on a busy day. So he puts very specific accommodations in different areas of the zoo so you know what you're getting yourself into. So very transparent, as we were mentioning before. All right, and so those are the examples. Again, start small. Just maybe talking to your website partner, or if you have IT, and adding an email. Email is, Jesse had mentioned this, email is honestly one of the best first practices you can do. Just having a place of contact. Point of contact is so important, and being that transparent. And like Jesse said, mentioning if your venue has stairs and doesn't have an access entrance, letting those customers know is really important because that customer can decide for themselves if they are able to go to that venue. And that's really important. And so I'm going to pass it now to Bill to talk about who is responsible. Thanks.
Thank you, Lauren. This is Bill again. So know who is responsible. Understand that when your organization has made clear what services are available, other accessibility information, and there are going to be questions, there are going to be requests. So you want to make sure that someone is responsible. It's great to create that access email. We highly encourage you create that access email. Think about who's checking that email and putting in redundancies to that. So it might be your access coordinator and your guest service staff or other people, but don't have it be one person because if they're not there on a weekend or something and somebody has a question or a concern that needs to be addressed more quickly than that, that email needs to be able to be responsive to that. So think about those redundancies and having multiple people available to that. Know who's arranging those services. So if one of your staff members gets a request for ASL from someone, they know who actually to go to, who has the connection to fulfill that request. So that can be done quickly. You can react and actually have somebody fairly quick with that. the problems become when someone gets a request like that and they don't know where to go. That can become not only frustrating for the venue itself, but also for the person who made the request. That's when accessibility seems to be more burdensome. We had a great example the day where I worked we had a request, and I think took us just a couple hours to actually fulfill an ASL request, because people knew who could fulfill that, and there were systems in place to support that request. Who audits accessibility? So it's great to put that in place, but you want to sustain that accessibility, and part of that is being willing to change, grow, and adapt as you learn from people in the community and you learn how your organization can best provide, and it maybe even changes who that accessibility is. So think about who that is. You might have a group within your organization made up from across departments, and it's their job to audit that accessibility, or for staff to bring questions to them or ideas to them, but it's a central place for them to be able to think about, for them to actually audit that accessibility and make sure that it's working. And when you're presenting this information, we've provided a lot of encouragement to put it on a website, but I encourage you again to be redundant in this information. So when people are signing up for your program, it's there on the event list. It's there with the event. When people are doing ticketing, it's there for the ticketing. So not only does your website have the email address where people can call to make or can email to make a request, but maybe it also does have a phone number. I think actually having a phone number is a great additional thing to do. But also there's a box like Lauren showed when they're putting in the ticket request to ask for accessibility. So being redundant can be really important. You can't repeat that, and you can't have too much information. And also think about all those different places you're putting that information and kind of how flexible that is to change, because with accessibility, there may be some quick changes that come about. There might be a change in a service provider where something you thought was going to be available may not, and you need to change or reschedule. There might be that construction that comes up that's a little more unexpected, and it's going to change how someone is going to access your building, etc. So wherever you're presenting that information, you want to be able to present it in a place that can be nimble, and you are quickly able to respond to and provide people the most updated information. That can be really beneficial for folks. So as a call to action from this, and something we would love to see people do, is think about your own organizations and even share with us, as we have some time here, you can share with us where in your organization can you make change about your communication? Where are those areas where you have some focus of control, and you can actually share that, whether that's on the website or in ticketing or other places at your venue, where you can help share this information and also just show people the great accessibility that you're providing. We go to the next slide. Oh, I'll throw it to Jesse.
Thanks again. So we've got a little time here at the end of our program, and we're going to take some live Q&A. We've been collecting some questions that you've provided, and I'm going to welcome back the rest of my presenting team back to the screen. Got a few folks here, just so we can best sort of field your questions. So we can dive in here with. Okay, great. Here's a broad one. What's the best way to organize a web page focused on accessibility? And are social stories something that should be widely used? So those are as a sort of part one and part two. If we want to talk about the sort of organization and presentation of the information on an Access website.
So this is Bill. I would just say that I liked some of the things that we saw in Lauren's example, where it used different disabilities to identify. And so if someone who identifies, because there can be so much information on that page, it can be almost overwhelming. So being able to know, for someone who is deaf, and they want to think about what's available in accessibility for them and specifically to be able to navigate quickly to that, whether that's being able to choose something on the site or using icons, the kind of universal accessibility icons to draw quick attention to that. I always think that's a great way because it can feel like you're putting out so much information to folks. So making that information as easily is easy to navigate and very clearly show which particular audience you're thinking of with those accommodations. At the same time, lots of people benefit from multiple people will benefit from many of the accommodations. So think about it too, that there will be people who want to read through everything.
Yeah, and I'll just double down on what Bill was saying. This is Jesse speaking again. I think that, if you think through and really start to think through your audience's experience of your organization and say, what barriers does this present? And think through it in as 360-degree a way as you possibly can, and sort of organize the information by barrier. That's sort of where I think where Lauren and CHF are doing some really strong work, is thinking through what are the barriers that our org presents, and because we're an itinerant company, right? What barriers do any of our venues present, because it isn't super effective for us to organize it, venue by venue. It is more useful for our audience to see a more holistic view. Does anybody else have thoughts on the organization of a web page before we move on to the social stories part of this question? Cool. Anybody want to dive into social stories and if they should be widely used?
This is Bill again. I can just say that I don't know how many months ago I went to the John Ball Zoo in Michigan, and I had never been to that zoo, and I used their social narrative before going, just to check it out for myself, just because I was interested in what the zoo was and what the experience was, and I really thought that enhanced my experience, and I liked doing that a lot. So I'm a believer in providing social narratives can be great for folks. We have one through the Culture City app for Lincoln Park Zoo. We also do them specifically for our summer camps. We've had them for zoo lights. We've had them for COVID policies and things. They're just, you never know who all wants to use or who would benefit from it. So it's great, some great thing to put out there on the chance that someone might use it. So I also think they're fun to write. So.
And I'm going to add, we don't necessarily have a venue at Chicago Humanities, so we are all over the city. And so with that, we are trying to kind of paint a picture of what you're going to walk into with our venue pages. And so we've started to, it's in the works, but we've started to video the venue so you know what you're getting into, because we're going to so many venues across the city that it could be a venue you've never actually been to before. So having that video as well as the description of what you're getting into it allows for you to have expectations, and you can decide, you can be the person to decide if you're willing to go or not.
Yeah. And a quick follow-up on the same topic. When you're creating the access page, is it better to write the social narrative or the language on the page from the guest perspective or from the organization's voice? Other preferences here? Ours is written from our org's voice, right, Lauren?
She nods, yes.
I find that that's pretty typical. I think that sort of owning your identity as the organization is crucial. And so I think that would be my preference. I don't know that I've actually seen the I don't know if I've actually seen the information framed from a guest perspective though.
And this is Bill. I think I've also, I'm not trying to think of one that I've seen in the guest perspective or from that like second person that a lot of social narratives would use. In the way that I would think of it is that by providing the information in more of a as the organization, you're providing it for someone to have the chance that these are what this is the accessibility that is available, and as a guest you have the chance to opt into and utilize these things, whereas the second person would seem more of a prescriptive way to present someone with a visit rather than letting them have the autonomy to come and visit in their own way. So
Yeah, I agree. Great, we've got one more. What do you find to be the most challenging aspect of accessibility in a virtual space, and how did you overcome it? Anybody want to take that one?
well, I will just say is like there's a lot of sensory information that if you're for bringing groups to Lincoln Park Zoo, there's a lot of multisensory information, smells and touches and things that are hard to communicate, um, or you have to just make an effort to communicate over virtual. There's so many multi-sensory experiences to have, and virtual becomes such a heavy on visual and audio, and leaves out a lot of those other senses.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. And I also, the sort of inverse of this question is that, in fact, our move to the virtual world, our sort of the ubiquity of Zoom has actually made a lot of programming more accessible than it was before. The fact that we're able to beam programming directly into people's homes, the fact that we're able to offer services like you see today with ASL interpretation and open captions provided either by a person or by a computer. You know, these are services that you can opt in and opt out with a click of a button in your own home. And so there is, I find to be a real tangible benefit in moving programming into a virtual space. Now, it does come with a couple caveats of like, this experience only offers so much. This is the limit of the experience, right? This box. But there are pros and cons for sure.
Jesse motions with his hands to the edges of the screen.
Great. I want to invite any other questions to be dropped into the Q&A, or feel free also to use the chat feature if that's easier. We've got a couple more here that I'm happy to toss out. How can you make information on your website itself more accessible? Are there any tips for making information easy to find or easy to access for folks using screen readers, for example? Anybody want to dive into that one?
This is Bill. I would just say that something to avoid that I see people all the time talk about difficulties is overlays for websites that are said to be accessible. Is that a lot of times creating a website and then putting an overlay on it that claims to be accessible can end up being make the website harder, or it cannot meet the necessary accessibility that somebody needs. And I don't know, put in lots of descriptions, image descriptions for pictures so that screen readers can have those too. I feel like that's something that a lot of websites leave out for not just pictures, but for buttons. So if you have a button like register or check out here, that seems like where a lot of websites go wrong, is leaving that descriptor out for a screen reader.
Yeah. And I can't recommend highly enough, you know, if your organization has the resources and you haven't had one done already, there's a huge amount of information in an accessibility audit for your website, right? It actually doesn't do a ton of good to put all of this access information on your website if your website itself is not accessible, right? So we have to make sure that we can get access to the information that we want. And so, you know, having an organization step in and truly do a top-down assessment of the accessibility of your organization's website is a good first place to start. And it is not exorbitantly expensive. it can be done for a reasonable amount of money. What those recommendations might be, it's hard to say, and what work may be needed to bring the most amount of access to a new website really depends. It's on an org by org basis, but huge fan of access audits for sure. Okay, we've got one more that came in through the chat. Are there external web resources beyond a venue's own website where audiences might go for their accessibility reviews, comments, or information about a given venue? I think so that we may have happened on $1 million idea here. Are you asking if there's a Yelp for access? Because if we just came up with that here on this webinar, I think we all get a share in the profit. I don't know of any third-party website that actively reviews venues accessibility. Anybody else?
There is, this is Bill, there is for those venues that are certified as sensory inclusive by Culture City, there's the Culture City app. They're not the only ones, but they're, I think, probably the most prevalently used. And you can go on to their app and search like Chicago or go through their map, and it'll bring up different venues, and people have given feedback, and it includes social narratives on there. It might include other information. Typically, it doesn't include all the information we've talked about today. It's not that extensive, and it would guide somebody toward a contact email or phone number for the venue, or to also information on that venue's website. But it is a third party that is that will provide information that people do use when they're planning visits and things like that.
Great, thank you, Bill. So the market's a little bit more crowded than I thought. Maybe not the $1 million idea but okay.
There are also some like disability like travel sites and things like that have information. Of course, I'm blanking on them at the moment, but yeah.
Absolutely. So just some feedback from our friend Ellen, who mentions that Northlight has a great example of a social narrative from the patron perspective. So if you're interested in taking a look at that, Northlight is a good reference for that. Here's a question from Brittany. Do you have any resources for creating sensory guides and social stories? Does anybody have a good reference for a social story or narrative? Lauren, we wrote one at Second City a few years ago, and I don't know what ever happened to it. But it was very much a draft one. I wouldn't say that it was a great example, but we certainly tried our hand at it.
Jesse, this is before for a social story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The way I've done, I've just read, so many places have them. I've read a bunch, and I read them that schools have made. For like a lot of schools have made it public where it's like, this is what to expect for the first day of school, or doctor's offices that have made them. So I like reading them. They're fun to write.
Do you have any tips or tricks? If we don't have direct resources that we can share, Bill, maybe you've got some insight into sort of what makes an effective sensory guide and social story?
Yeah, I think keeping the text simple, thinking about like keeping the social narrative pretty short so that it's not going on for a long time, and thinking about those most important things that you want to show, keeping a real positive tone, and being very like using pictures, using photos of the venue, what things we'll actually look at rather than illustrations can be really helpful.
Sure.
And keeping text simple. I saw someone say this before, that's like they tend to be geared towards younger folks. So also think about those kind of early readers that might be using that.
Sure. Here's an interesting one. How does all of this change for a large outdoor space with many different trails, walking services, and outdoor events, a wide range of conditions, distances, and possible experiences, etc.? I had not considered a walking trail. Thoughts on communication of access in that context?
This is Carly. I would say that map that we shared of the Lincoln Park Zoo would be a good way to give that example of maybe you can identify different walking surfaces on the map itself, or maybe kind of have that indicator on the map. And I would say this is probably a very good place to have a clear contact person kind of identified, so that it would be maybe difficult to identify every single outdoor condition that's going to arise. So maybe just have a point of contact and have their contact information clearly listed so that someone can find it.
Yeah. Personally, as someone who has a mobility disability, I would really benefit from, are there handrails? Are there stairs? What are the surfaces? Are they wet? Because I went through a beautiful walking trail through a series of waterfalls in Croatia. It was beautiful and stunning, and I almost fell in. So just, keep that in mind as to how your audience is interacting with the trail. And know that, like, especially folks with mobility disabilities, they're going to want to know surface, they're going to want to know additional support that's available, and they're going to want to know distance. How long am I committed to this for, and how much, and also, if you've got the information, things like incline or degree of difficulty are also, I know that's a little more subjective, but knowing that I'm going to be walking 5 miles uphill without handrails in the rain is going to let me know a lot about what that experience is, right?
Yeah, and this is Bill. I would add to that too. When we're doing things outdoor, we tend to have, talking about staff member responsibilities, a staff member who is watching weather. So if weather comes up, they're the person who can alert us if we need to take things like a shelter in place or something like that because of storm conditions. So having somebody who knows, like, their responsibility is watching for that and anticipating anything that might happen for outdoor. And if you're going to have an emergency because of weather, making sure your emergency procedures actually do include accessibility, which is a whole other series we could do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, I think we've got time for one more, and this is a good one. So it's a good one for us to end on today. What are some strategies for conflicts of access? For example, I've experienced COVID mitigation strategies that can conflict with sensory needs and ASL needs, et cetera, et cetera. So thoughts on conflicts of access, especially in our COVID and mask-heavy world. Anybody?
Yeah, I can speak to this. This is
Please.
Lauren. Yeah, so with Chicago Humanities, our events are live in-person events, and during COVID times, we would have masks for people, but we would also let our staff know that a person who is deaf or a person who's hard of hearing, you may need to ask them on your phone if they're comfortable with taking the mask down so they can possibly understand you a little bit better. And then also I bought clear masks for our staff to provide for them in case they wanted to use that. And then Clorox wipes was a big thing with our sensory toys, just always cleaning everything all the time, and to ensure the customers that our materials are cleaned before they receive them.
Yeah. The other thing that I would say too is that there is no perfect way to do this work, right? Those conflicts will arise. And the theme of our talk today is really about being transparent and upfront about those conflicts, about those challenges, and letting your audience know this is what you can expect when you walk into our venue. And know that many of us adapt every day, all the time. And so going in armed with information is really the most important thing, so that we can figure out how best to engage in your programming, whether it's a museum, whether it's a show, whether it's a walking trail. Right. Well, we are going to wrap up our program today. Thank you all for such a fruitful Q&A. It was really fun to field your questions and get to hear some of your thoughts and concerns. So that's going to do it for us.
A slide appears. Left QR code resource link bit.ly/3 capital S lowercase I capital QIRA. Right QR code donations link bit.ly/lowercase donate the numeral 2 uppercase C lowercase OLLAB.
We would like to invite you to check out this QR code or the bit.ly link to find resources related to this program. This document includes today's slideshow presentation, so if you want to take that with you, as well as some collected resources that I heard people asking for in the Q&A and in the chat. So please follow these QR codes. We hope that you enjoyed yourselves, and if you did, we would hope that you would consider making a small donation to support the mission of the Cultural Access Collaborative. Even just $5 will really help make our work sustainable, and we obviously are very impassioned about the work that we do. We would really appreciate any support that you can give us. At this time, we're going to wrap up, and we'd like to thank all the presenters for sharing their tips on how to say it loud and say it proud. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Oh, I have more to say. In the chat, you'll find our feedback survey, which we invite you to complete, so please do that at your leisure. And thanks to all our accessibility providers that worked on our production team, and mostly thank you for joining us and offering your support to the Cultural Access Collaborative. We hope to see you at our next event, which will be an in-person open house that'll showcase our accessible equipment loan program. So if you're wondering, how in the world do I get open captions into my venue? We can help you with that by loaning the necessary equipment, ALDs, etc. So please save that date. It'll be on Tuesday, December 19th in the afternoon at the Peggy Notebart Nature Museum. And you can get your hands on some of this technology and try it out for the first time. More details on that coming very, very soon. And thank you one last time from the Cultural Access Collaborative. Have a great afternoon.
Credits appear. Loud and Proud, maximizing your accessibility info for guests. Presented by Cultural Access Collaborative. For workshop resources and more information, visit culturalaccesscollab.org. Presenting speakers: Bill Green, Steering Committee Member and Hart Prins Fund Accessibility and Inclusion Manager at Lincoln Park Zoo. Jesse Swanson, Steering Committee Member and Festival Producer at Chicago Humanities. Carly Englander, Steering Committee Member and Career Placement Counselor at Chicago Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. Lauren Pincus, Steering Committee Member and Audience Accessibility Coordinator at Chicago Humanities. Workshop Accessibility, Efficiency Reporting, Real-Time Captioning, First Choice Interpreting, ASL Interpretation, Video Editing, Captioning, and Audio Description by BridgetMelton.com.